In the intricate machinery of galactic order, peace was never the true mechanism of control. It was balance, imposed by the towering presence of ancient species who knew their dominance was unshakable, and by the compliance of lesser civilizations who dared not challenge it. At the peak of this quiet hierarchy stood the Chirel Dominion, crystalline entities from the deep ice caverns of Neptune's moon, Triton. Their minds functioned across multiple dimensions, and they claimed to have resolved entropy twice. To them, linear time was a design flaw, and lesser species were charming puzzles. Close behind were the Vakari Ascendancy, predator-descended hybrids from the forests of Tau Ceti F. They combined raw instinct with biological quantum computation. Their eyes gleamed with the constant calculation of threat and opportunity, and they spoke in a tone that always seemed one step away from attack. Completing the top tier were the Namor Collective, an ancient neural network of insectoid entities rooted in the magnetic storms of Gliese 581G. They spoke in harmonic pulses unreadable to most, and their thoughts were so dense with probability that unprotected minds collapsed under the weight of proximity. Then came the newest species to the galactic scene, the humans. They arrived without elegance, ceremony, or comprehension of where they were. The Galactic Concord received their first interstellar message, a flickering radio wave containing garbled speech about peace, cooperation, and an unknown substance called pizza. It was dismissed as background noise until a linguistics AI noticed the recurring syntax matched no known natural radiation. The Chirel High Chancellor, Elias Wren, observed the human's debut transmission with a pulse of amusement. He turned to his advisory cluster, flesh-based, vulnerable, and woefully under-equipped. How did they survive long enough to build ships? Their entrance into galactic society was compared to a toddler stumbling into a war room. The humans' spacecraft looked like they'd been bolted together by enthusiastic amateurs, lopsided, jagged, bristling with components that had no business being exposed to vacuum. They still use combustion, whispered Thorn Ryle, a Vakari trade envoy. Actual flames to land on planets. Primitive, agreed another, watching archival footage of a human rocket sputtering through re-entry. And yet, they came. Led by an earnest diplomat named Lauren Maddox, humanity's first official delegation to the Concord arrived on Concordia Prime with awkward smiles, outdated translators, and cultural misunderstandings in every sentence. They apologized frequently, bowed at strange moments, shook hands, offered tea. When the Dralith Syndicate, an aggressive horde from Epsilon Indi, threatened them over a navigational border, Lauren offered to discuss mutual development zones and time-shared mining rights. The Dralith, who had eradicated 3 species in the past standard cycle, agreed out of sheer confusion. It wasn't technology that unnerved the Concord, it was humanity's optimism, a relentless, smiling, unbreakable optimism. On paper, the humans were pathetic. They had no natural weapons, no fangs, claws, toxins, or psychic barriers. Their sensory ranges were comically narrow. They were blind to large portions of the electromagnetic spectrum. Their olfactory sense was underdeveloped. Their hearing range was limited. "They're walking food packs," muttered Commander Valon Tech, a security officer for the Korean Union. Any planet with predatory life would have wiped them out in a century. Yet the humans came from Earth, a planet so dangerous that galactic survey teams labeled it a Class 5 hazard world. It had seismic instability, hypercanes, volcanic belts, deadly fauna, and microbial assassins in every body of water. How did they survive it? According to them, ingenuity. When a Korean analyst asked how humanity dealt with its native predators, Jonah Reeves, a cultural attaché, responded casually, "We threw rocks until we figured out better rocks." No one laughed, at least not for long. Humanity was granted provisional member status within the Concord. It was a formality, a gesture of inclusion with no real weight. A few elite delegates debated whether it was even necessary, but the consensus was simple. What harm could they do? The humans were overjoyed. They built embassies and trade stations on half a dozen Concord-sanctioned worlds. Their structures were modest, glass-walled, open air. They included strange green patches they called gardens. When confused alien diplomats asked the purpose, they said it made them feel less homesick. They handed out snacks, small, sweet, round objects called cookies, and dark, bitter fluid called coffee. The beverages contained mild stimulants. The food was warm, cozy. Soon, high-ranking officials from across the galaxy made surprise visits to the human embassy before important sessions, just for the refreshments, they claimed. By the end of their first galactic cycle, the humans had not invented anything significant. No breakthroughs, no victories, no revolutions. Yet they were everywhere. They had double the expected trade agreements. They were present in dozens of committees. They had access to more information than any new member species in recorded history. They're useful, some said. They're entertaining, said others. They're harmless. The Nemor Collective noted rising anomalies, diplomatic biases, shifting power indexes, influence graphs that bent inhumanly. They began writing a theorem, a model for an emerging influence pattern. They never finished it. Instead, several key mind clusters became enthralled by something called reality television. They described it as statistically impossible and emotionally devastating. They canceled all analytical projections. The humans began embedding themselves into every corner of the Concord. Their presence didn't disrupt the galactic machine. It adjusted to accommodate them. And still they smiled. When faced with tariffs, they complied. When given unfavorable trade routes, they accepted. When insulted in council, they responded with friendly curiosity. No resistance, no retaliation, only questions, smiles, patience. Leah Grant, a logistics specialist on the Concord's Trade Oversight Panel, once said they never push, but somehow they always end up where they want to be. The few who tried to block human advancement found strange things happening. Allies withdrawing, resources vanishing, reputations quietly eroding, but there was never evidence. No provable connections, just small cracks that widened, one by one, until support collapsed. What threat could they possibly pose? They have no weapons, no war fleets. They serve coffee, they laugh, they're friendly, they shake hands and talk about weather. But hidden behind every smile was calculation. Beneath every polite concession was a pattern, and every cookie was a Trojan horse. Humanity wasn't competing in the same game. They were replacing the board, and no one noticed. Yet, as the cycles turned, humans became a familiar fixture in galactic life. Their embassy on Concordia Prime hosted more interspecies gatherings than any other diplomatic post. On the surface, they were exactly what everyone assumed. Naive optimists, ambassadors who offered cookies and conversation, traders who haggled less and delivered more. And yet, subtle shifts began to appear. The first noticeable change came from the Kreelan Syndicate, a species infamous for its piracy masked as taxation policy. Their sleek warships had a tradition of boarding inspections on vessels from less defended systems, particularly newly chartered colonies. When they turned their gaze on humanity's early transport ships, no one was surprised. 3 raids occurred in as many months. Then nothing. No declaration of policy change, no apology, no compensation. The Kreelans simply redirected their operations to quieter corners of the rim. Diplomats asked why. The syndicate's representatives gave vague answers about strategic reallocation and inefficiency mitigation. They were lying, and they were scared. Colonel Bryson Shaw, a human military advisor stationed on Io, had quietly led a delegation of cultural researchers on a tour of the Kreelan homeworld just before the raid stopped. Nothing was ever published about that visit, but rumors swirled. Whispers of the researchers identifying anatomical weaknesses in Kreelan physiology, pressure points, neural vulnerabilities. One analyst claimed the humans had found ancient predation fears embedded deep in Kreelan brain structure, leftovers from evolutionary predators long extinct. Shortly afterward, Kreelan captains began requesting reassignment away from sectors where human trade routes passed. Coincidence, said the official reports. Pattern, muttered those paying attention. Elsewhere, similar tremors spread. The Baratheon Trade Corps, known for predatory contracts filled with microscopic legal traps, suddenly became uncharacteristically generous in deals involving human companies. The famous subsell clauses, written in quantum-size fonts and designed to trigger legal takeovers, disappeared completely from human agreements. They're learning ethical commerce, declared Trade Counselor Nevar at a Concord summit. They're terrified, whispered his aide after witnessing a negotiation session where analyst Mason Lee, a soft-spoken human, politely referenced the names and home coordinates of every executive's extended family. The information wasn't publicly available. Not even in Concord archives. It had been protected. He never made threats. He just knew things. Markets began reacting strangely in human influence zones. Enterprises previously labeled as quaint or primitive began outperforming sector giants. Profits soared. Competitors quietly backed away. Human corporations, often family-run, started anticipating market shifts with eerie accuracy. They're exploiting gaps in predictive modeling, offered economist Sarah Tallon of the Orion Metrics Guild. What she didn't publish was that her simulations broke down when human behavior was added to the equation. They introduced chaos, but not randomly, intentionally. Data analysis from 16 commercial sectors revealed identical anomalies. Whenever a human business entered a field, it first operated at a loss, studied competitors, built friendly relationships, then pivoted just as demand peaked, cornering entire niches. Somehow they knew when to pivot. Some believed it was dumb luck. Others suspected a much longer game. Technology began to shift too. Human scientists, despite their late arrival to the galactic table, were absorbing alien technology at a rate considered impossible. Protocols designed to take decades of shared development were leapfrogged in months. Human labs on Titan and Mars filed for integration clearances in 12 fields, everything from artificial gravity harmonics to localized wormhole channeling. The Council of Advancement in Scientific Ethics, CASE, flagged it for review. Within 2 cycles, the head of CASE had accepted an early retirement offer and relocated to a human colony on Proxima Centauri AU. When questioned by investigators, he cited a deep desire to drink cocktails on a planet with sunsets like fire. Investigations closed the next day. The galactic military complex began to stir with unease. Historically aggressive species like the Draka Dominion started cooperating. Known for their policy of fire first, ignore the survivors, they suddenly approved every human trade route without resistance. They have discovered art, claimed cultural liaison Renix. This after Draka generals attended a cultural exchange on Earth where they visited dozens of museums, attended symphonies, and spent one evening at a military history institute in New Phoenix. The records of that visit were sealed. Shortly after, the Draka signed a 10-year peace agreement with human frontier colonies. Another anomaly. Then came the Kael Imperium, known rivals of the humans' early allies. Their emperor, a being so xenophobic he refused to share planetary air with off-worlders, suddenly invited human diplomats to his palace. 2 weeks later, a joint resource treaty was signed. His official statement referenced a newfound appreciation for universal harmony. His inner circle, however, was silent. One counselor was seen repeatedly checking a necklace given to her by a human envoy. The ornament's interior had, according to black market sources, a micro-data shard containing schematics for the Imperium's fleet weaknesses, or so the rumors said. And still, no direct threats were made. No weapons drawn, no fleets moved, just gestures, conversations, gifts, and a slow, creeping loyalty shift. Back on Concordia Prime, a new trend was taking hold: the Cultural Exchange Initiative. Aliens from all over the galaxy were invited to human colony worlds to experience Earth culture firsthand. These weren't brief tours. They were immersion programs lasting months. Military leaders, corporate directors, political advisors, and every one of them came back, changed. They smiled more, agreed faster, advocated for cooperation, spoke fondly of shared meals, long hikes, Earth music, and something called barbecue. The Vakari strategist Jalen Voss, who had once advised preemptive assault on all frontier species, returned from Earth and gave a strange address to the Council. I understand them now. their ways, their thoughts. They are not weak. They are deep. He never elaborated. What he never told them was this. During one private night, his human guide, an engineer named Erica Dalton, had laid out in calm, clinical terms exactly how Earth forces could dismantle Vakari fleets using decommissioned 21st century technology in strategic misdirection, not in theory, in detail. Jalen had smiled politely and said it was enlightening. Then he went home and erased half of his invasion plans. In the shadows of all this, a few alarm voices began to rise. Encrypted reports flowed between intelligence divisions. The Galactic Intelligence Chorus, an informal alliance of cross-species analysts, began tagging human-related files with anomaly flags. Leak frequencies involving humans were rising. Data systems previously secure began to fail at higher rates, always near human embassies. Coincidence, said the official memos. Confirmation bias, said the skeptics. Still, files went missing, encryption cracked, and no one could trace it. Those who pushed too hard for answers were reassigned, discredited, disappeared. Counselor Rowan Kett, an elder member of the Nareen Hive, raised questions during a closed session. 3 days later, he was cited in a scandal involving exotic neural stem lattices and sent to a rehabilitation colony on a low-gravity moon. He had no prior record of indulgence. His replacement voted in favor of expanded human-eye intelligence sharing agreements. The consensus held, humans were friendly. They weren't taking anything by force. They were building bridges, encouraging peace, promoting trade. So what if their influence was growing? They were allies. They shook hands and baked cookies. They weren't a threat. But somewhere deep in the archives, the archivists of Ilaria, neutral chroniclers of galactic history, quietly opened a new sealed file. Anomalous influence vectors, species 64, beta, the classification tag assigned to humanity. The file grew, but no one dared to connect the final dots. Not yet. The pieces were there, scattered across the stars, but few had the clarity or the courage to put them together. Because if they did, they might realize what had already happened. The board was gone, the game had changed, and the humans had rewritten the rules. Ambassador Caleb Stratton was not a creature prone to paranoia. After 6,000 years of diplomatic service to the crystalline Valari continuum, he had negotiated treaties in black hole orbitals, arbitrated ceasefires between telepathic swarms, and once brokered a cultural exchange between a fungus hive and a plasma cloud. He was calm, composed, logical, until now. It had started innocently. Stratton had been tasked with compiling a historical report on interspecies conflict resolution trends, a routine analysis for the Concord's archives, expected to take a few rotations, perhaps a week. He'd ordered a basic query from the diplomatic archives, display all territorial disputes involving human colonies in the past 50 cycles. He'd expected a dozen incidents, maybe 20. Instead, the chamber walls lit up with hundreds of markers, each a conflict resolved in humanity's favor, each without military action, no wars, no retaliations, just outcomes, favorable ones. This is incorrect, he muttered, activating verification routines. Filter for data corruption. System integrity at 99.97%. The AI responded smoothly. For the next 17 cycles, Stratton abandoned every other task. He worked through solar rotations, bypassing rest intervals, sustaining himself on energy pulses and ambient crystal harmonics. His form dimmed with fatigue, but his mind sharpened. He dug deeper. He mapped economic outcomes, political realignments, trade flows. He charted the movement of personnel after contact with human delegations. He overlaid these with resource allocations, fleet movements, and diplomatic appointments. The results were undeniable. Where humans engaged, systems changed. Empires pivoted. Markets adjusted. Entire defense strategies shifted orientation. They were playing a different game. "We move pieces across the board," Stratton whispered into his personal journal. "They're replacing the board itself." With grim focus, Stratton accessed Earth's historical archives using his ambassadorial clearance. He reviewed the biological and evolutionary history of Homo sapiens. It was common knowledge that Earth was a hostile world, but the depth of its danger had never been fully considered. It wasn't just a dangerous planet, it was a forge. Volcanoes, hurricanes, megafauna, airborne toxins, pandemics, ice ages. Earth was a trial by survival, an evolutionary crucible. Most intelligent species had evolved in stable environments. Earth was the opposite, a world that tried to kill its inhabitants daily, and somehow humanity thrived. But it wasn't brute strength that allowed them to endure. It was endurance itself. They sweat, Stratton noted with quiet dread. Their bodies cool during extended motion. They evolved to chase prey until it collapsed. Persistence predators. They didn't need claws or venom. They just needed to keep going. For miles, for hours, for days. They were never the fastest, never the strongest. But they were the most stubborn apex species the galaxy had ever seen. And now they had left their homeworld. Stratton turned to history. He found what he feared. War. Endless war. Their civilizations had fought each other across millennia. Not brief skirmishes, sustained, adaptive conflict. They hadn't learned warfare after reaching space. They had perfected it long before they ever saw the stars. Conflict wasn't a breakdown in diplomacy for humans. It was a cultural constant, a framework for problem solving. And perhaps most disturbing, their empathy. Most species with a high degree of empathy were pacifists. But humans could feel your pain, and then use that insight to inflict more effective suffering. They could imagine exactly how to hurt you, and then talk you through it while smiling. They weaponized compassion, Stratton realized. They used understanding to manipulate, to predict, and to control. Human military history proved this. Over time, they evolved from open conflict to subversion, espionage, misinformation, economic pressure, cultural infiltration, psychological warfare, and they excelled at all of it. Stratton stood before his console and issued a new command. Display diplomatic influence spread by human entities over the last 50 standard years. The hologram bloomed. Tendrils of soft light extended from Earth. Threads of color wrapped around sectors like vines. They interwove with planetary governments, anchored into research hubs, encircled military staging areas, and each tendril forked into redundancies, backup relationships, second-tier alliances, soft power dependencies. It looked like a virus infiltrating a body. It was everywhere. It wasn't force. It was infiltration, normalization, dependency. They don't conquer, Stratton whispered. They subvert. They replace resistance with gratitude. They turn threats into assets. They wait. And the galaxy gave them time. Accessing personal files, Stratton compiled a classified dossier and prepared a presentation to the Concord Security Council. He encoded the data with algorithms only the Valari High Command could decipher. The threat was existential. They had to act now. He scheduled the presentation. Then everything changed. The meeting was postponed, then rescheduled, then canceled. His access codes were revoked. His communications were blocked. When he attempted to reach allies directly, he received formal warnings. Violations of protocol, the messages read, though none listed specific violations. Within 2 days, rumors spread about Stratton's mental stability. Archived reports surfaced, long-buried ones, questioning his past pattern recognition work. Paranoia, some hinted. Conspiracy mapping tendencies. The Valari Council recommended stasis therapy for crystalline resonance fatigue. His assistant disappeared. The local copies of his findings? Erased. He was alone. Until a knock came at his chamber door. A human. Diplomatic aide Kara Monroe. Someone he'd met only twice. Ambassador Stratton, she said warmly, placing a small crystal cube on his desk. We heard you've been stressed. Our cultural staff thought you might enjoy this. A piece of Earth history. Very inspiring. She turned to leave. The cube activated. A book title hovered in the air. How to Win Friends and Influence People. It's a classic, she said. It's all about relationships. As she reached the door, she smiled. We're looking forward to the cultural exchange next month. Your planet's crystal forests sound beautiful. Our geological team is very eager to explore. The door closed behind her. Stratton stared at the cube. It glowed softly, harmless, inviting. He sank into his chair. He realized what had happened. He had been too late. The warning would never be heard. The virus had spread too far. The predator was already in the house. And no one would believe the danger because the predator didn't roar. It smiled and asked about your children. The Galactic Security Council convened beneath the shimmering vaults of the Concordia Prime Dome, a structure built from translucent alloys mined from five-star systems. Representatives from every major civilization were present, hundreds of species, thousands of perspectives. But one voice was missing. Ambassador Caleb Stratton, who had authored a security warning on human influence vectors, was absent. When asked, a Valari junior diplomat replied without emotion. Ambassador Stratton has taken an indefinite sabbatical for resonance therapy. Some of his recent findings were deemed methodologically unsound. No one questioned it. A human representative stepped forward, Elaine Carter, a graceful envoy with an ever-present smile and a demeanor so soothing it could calm solar flares. As the Council considers the future of interspecies security, she said, we believe it's important to emphasize the positive impact of cooperative diplomacy. The Chamber's display lit up with charts and visuals, trade routes expanding, conflict zones receding, formerly aggressive civilizations now approving mutual development plans, always shortly after human cultural visits. Even the Draylen War clusters, once considered irredeemable, had signed energy accords with Earth-run stations. Look at the results, said Councillor Vin Drax, long known for hawkish views. The data speaks for itself. Stratton's ally, Councillor Rowan Trell, raised a hand. These are the very anomalies Ambassador Stratton warned us about. This influence is not natural. It's too uniform, too effective. Councillor Drax turned to him with narrowed pupils. Stratton's data was compromised. His conclusions biased. Let's not dwell on outdated paranoia. On Drax's forearm, a simple band glinted in the lights, an Earth-made bracelet, stylish, decorative, but its data signature was active. Elaine's eyes flicked briefly to it and then back to the room. With all due respect, she said, our goal is peace. Isn't that what we've always wanted? The Chamber murmured agreement. And so, almost unanimously, the Council voted to approve the Interspecies Security Cooperation Charter, installing human diplomats as advisory liaisons across all major galactic defense systems. Only one vote registered as dissent. A technical malfunction, the system labeled it. It was Trell's. Afterward, Elaine approached him privately. We understand family is important to the Norellan people, she said gently. Your eldest hatchling just began education at the Central Tactics Institute on your homeworld, yes? He nodded, unsure why the chill crawled through his core. She smiled again. We're pleased with his progress. Truly exceptional. The message was clear. He changed his vote in the amendment session the following day. Across the galaxy, the shift was complete. No war fleets, no invasions, no broadcasts declaring conquest, just quiet appointments, signed partnerships, access rights, and behind it all, the same pleasant smiles, the same Earth snacks, the same human charm. The predators had been invited in. On Earth, in a windowless building below the capital city of New Columbia, a panel of human strategists reviewed the vote results. No celebration followed, no speeches, just quiet nods and the final entry on a secure document. Phase 1, complete. Strategic timelines were updated. New targets selected. The next goal, systemic integration. The humans didn't think of themselves as conquerors. They were survivors. And the galaxy had given them everything they needed to win. It had handed them access, power, trust, and never once asked what they planned to do with it. Stratton, now exiled to a crystalline retreat on Luna's dark side, spent his days wandering fractured ice caves. Officially, he was being treated for cognitive distortion. Unofficially, he was silenced. Occasionally, anonymous messages reached him. Snippets of support, a phrase in an encrypted pulse, they've reached the core, a warning encoded in subharmonics. The Meraxis cluster has fallen, but nothing could stop the tide now. The humans had built a network too vast, too resilient, too deeply entangled with galactic infrastructure. They didn't invade. They were essential. And removing them would collapse entire systems. Ambassador Stratton recorded his final entry in a secure, untraceable crystal journal. They didn't come with guns or flags. They didn't conquer planets or demand tribute. They just became too useful to ignore. And when we finally noticed what they were, it was already too late. The apex predator doesn't roar, it whispers, and makes you believe the idea was yours. 3 days later, Stratton's name was quietly removed from the Concord's official registry of living ambassadors, his legacy erased. The last resistance came from the Korlathi Tribunal, a rigid, isolationist triad of species that had long warned of human expansionism. Their leadership drafted a motion to restrict human advisory access. The vote never happened. The tribunal's key sponsor, High Jurist Errol Cax, fell into sudden scandal over fabricated credentials. Accusations seeded with evidence no one could verify, but which matched her personal code perfectly. Her replacement signed the Human Cooperation Amendment within hours of appointment. Her final public message? I see now that we misunderstood humanity. They are our future. 1 year later, the newly established Concord Security Directorate announced its High Coordinator, a human, appointed unanimously, no opposition, not even from the Norellans, Vakari, or Karel, species once counted among the most dominant in the galaxy. The announcement came with smiling faces and uplifting music. The galaxy had a new protector. The galaxy sighed in relief, and Earth quietly moved into the heart of power. In a quiet room on Phobos, a former intelligence operative stared at an analysis on his private tablet. No one else cared, no one else noticed, but he saw the trend. Species that once spoke against humans had gone quiet. Leaders who resisted had resigned. Institutions that questioned were restructured. He whispered to himself, almost in awe. They didn't just win. They convinced us it was our idea to let them. Outside, the red dust swirled, and far above, in the void between stars, humanity waited. Not for conquest, not for rebellion, but for the final phase. Integration was done. Now came legacy. They had made themselves indispensable, and in doing so, had become invincible.